Very good. Which year? Okay. We're doing a study.
It's actually, I've asked him the question.
Turn it on?
Yeah, turn it on. Let's look at mine. Announcements.
It's supposed to be Dan, there are supposed to be Danny too.
It's on.
There are supposed to be Danny on both sides.
We only have.
So things are really back to normal because the dancers are coming out.
So good morning.
First, a good morning.
This is the moment that many of us have been waiting for. Bruchim Habayim, and it's a big simcha to see every one of us who made it this morning. And even with those wearing masks, I could see the smile under your mask. But Baruch Hashem, to be here live is a big schos. Hod Hashem ki tov, ki l'olam chazdo. And I'm sure each of us have our own stories, what went on over the past few months. And we're very grateful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be here. This morning's shir is sponsored Schus Refu Shalema, Yehudis Leah Bas Simul Michla, and Sviarye Ben Bela Yita, Yeshav Refu Shalema. Thank you very much from the Floringer family. And also Zecher Nishmas Rachmiel Yosef Ben Gershon from the Berger family. When you think about, having the first live share, let's think about a topic, what to do. And I thought of doing another personality in, you call it the Halachic Personality Series. Instead of just analyzing a topic in Halacha and utilizing our great poskim through the ages, we developed this series of analyzing poskim and trying to put together a sketch of their psakim and perhaps any themes or something special about them that stands out. And we've done Kananahara quite a few poskim. Just this year alone, gave a shir on Rabbi Feinstein. I believe it's over 200 people have watched the shir, and the scope of the shir really goes beyond the confines of this room. I gave a shir earlier this year also on Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg. I think that one had a cute title, whose reach spanned from, I forgot the exact language, but something like from Tinet to Beit Vagan, everywhere in between. For that shir, I had the schus, a family member of Reb Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, who actually also learned the Chavrusa with him. I had never had the schus of meeting with Zalman Nechemia, but he said that the whole family was passing around that shir, and they felt it really defined him quite well. It's supposed to be part of such a thing. So this morning, today's shir is entitled Rav Aharon Kotler, Lakewood's first and foremost Posek. In fact, just yesterday in Shul, Chashav al Talmud Chacham said to me, I saw the title of your shir, and never realized that Aharon Kotler was a Posek. I think that itself is already satisfying that my share impacted someone before they even heard it. Just the title alone. And I think with Aharon Kotler, he was such a great figure. He's obviously famous for starting the Lakewood Yeshiva, which in many ways he played a major role in the growth of Torah in America today. He was known for his work during World War II, saving as many lives as possible from here in America, leading, one of the leaders of the Vad Hatzalah. He was already known in Europe. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of Kletsk. So those are all major titles, accomplishments that Rav Aharon Kotler is most known for. But at the same time, Rav Aharon Kotler was also Posek. And today's shir, we're going to try to bring that out. Now, it is a very tricky topic. I remember last year we gave a share of Yaakov Kamenetsky. That one we called a memorable gadol, but a forgotten Posek. A similar thing that people know of Rabbi Yaakov as one of the Gedolei Hador, he was Rosh Yeshiva, but people forgot he was also Posek. But there Rabbi Yaakov has a sefer and all Shulchan Aruch. And there's what to find. Rav Aharon I found was a lot more challenging. Now I did utilize, Rav Aharon in his lifetime didn't publish, but his family published 2 volumes entitled Mishnas Rav Aharon, Shalos Tshuvos, which between them I believe has 76 tshuvos, most of them pretty long and complex, no quick psukim, at least inside the Mishnas Rav Aharon. But I went through many svarim which I found things quoted b'shem Rav Aharon. There's one sefer, Kuntris in particular, which is a phenomenal sefer. It's a little Kuntris called Nahag B'Chachma, going through the minhagim of the Lakewood Yeshiva regarding davening and Yom Tovim, days of the week, and it extensively quotes Rav Aharon. And we'll use that later. I spoke to a lot of people. I reached out to Chashav Talmid Chacham in Eretz Yisrael. He called me back in late Thursday night, early Friday morning, Eretz Yisrael time, to answer some of my questions I had. He learned by Rav Aharon. And together, I think we should have a nice portrait and a nice halakhic analysis of who Rav Aharon Kotler was. Before we begin the actual halakhic shaylas, just a brief biography. Rav Aharon Kotler, nice little trivia, was not born Aharon Kotler. His family name was actually Pines. He was born in 1891 in an area which currently is Russia, but through the decades went through a few different fights. Lithuania, Belarus, whatever. His family actually changed the name, which was quite common in the Jewish world, changed the name to Kotler to avoid the Russian army draft. So his father might have been named Pines, but he was named Kotler. Unfortunately, his father passed away when he was only 10 years old. And this itself led for a challenging young period of his life. He was raised by an uncle, but obviously as an orphan, there were many different influences which were all trying to prey on this young Eloi, this young genius, Talmid Chacham. And there's some famous stories of how within the Haskalah, within the secular movement, there was a lot of effort invested in trying to lure young Aharon Kotler out of the base medrash, out of the yeshiva, and he withstood that. The most famous yeshiva he learned in, which had a big impact on him, was the Slobodka yeshiva. He learned there for many years, interacted with some of the famous Gedolim, Reuven Gruzovsky, I believe is credited as bringing him to yeshiva. He learned together with Mishpacha, Yaakov Kamenetsky, founder of Chavetz Chaim, Reb David Leibowitz, and many, many great Gedolim all interacted with him in his time in Slobodka. He got married to the daughter of Reb Isser Zalman Meltzer, who at the time was actually a Rebbe in Slobodka. And he himself became the Rosh Yeshiva in his father-in-law's yeshiva, which was called Kletsk. Originally it was in a different place called Slutsk. But from Slutsk to Kletsk, I guess that's an improvement. But probably for us on these shores, the turning point in Rabbi Aharon Kotler's life was at the age of 50. In 1941, he came to these shores the month of April, and basically from the moment he got off the boat. In fact, there was a famous story I read. Irving Bunim has a beautiful book. He was a big Askin, a big lay leader in the early Jewish community in America, and he became a Talmud of Rabbi Aharon Kotler, super close Talmud. And Irving Bunim describes the scene how they went around on Shabbos to fundraise money to bring Rabbi Aharon Kotler to America. And there was actually a psak for many Gedolim that you have to go around even on Shabbos. It was Hatzalos Nefashos, literally bringing Rabbi Aharon. He brought the general of the war, the leader of the Vada, one of the leaders of Vada Tzala. And from the moment he got off the boat, despite the fact he had offers already then to open the yeshiva, his focus was saving Jews in Europe. And that's what he did for years. After the end of the war, he opened his famous yeshiva of Lakewood, and as they say, the rest of that is history. By the time he was nifter, Lakewood only had about 200 Talmidim. He was nifter in 1961, basically only 20 years later. But those 20 years that he had in these shores, we'll see soon, had such an amazing impact on literally all of us today. Now, in terms of talking about Rabbi Aharon Kotler and halacha, I think the first area that I am going to focus on is his prominence as a posek. As was mentioned in the story, people scratched their heads. Rabbi Aharon Kotler was a posek? He sure was. Actually, what led me to this, just a couple weeks ago, I saw a story how Rabbi Aharon Kotler would had a seder with one of his Talmidim in yeshiva for an hour a week, learning Shulchan Aruch, learning Mishnah Berurah, learning halacha. This Talmud is the famous head of the Star K, Rav Moshe Heinemann. He had a seder with Rabbi Aharon Kotler, learning an hour a week, going through Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah Berurah, Psak Halacha. Rav Aharon was also famously seen in many events holding a Mishnah Berurah. Wherever he went, there was a Mishnah Berurah on his side. There's a famous picture, that's the one we used, that we sent out. It was at the Chinuch Hatzmoi dinner. I believe that was the year that they honored Rav Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, Rosh Yeshiva of Yitzchak Elchanan, YU. He's sitting there next to Irving Bunim, holding a Mishnah Berurah. That's what he carried with him all the time. So there are some stories. I found Rav Shurkin from Eretz Yisrael has the story that Rav Hutner asked Rav Aharon, how come you're always carrying a Mishnah Berurah? You can't think in learning in your head? Come on, you need a sefer? Supposedly, Aharon's line back was, hey, we're going to all these meetings which we're figuring out major things for Klal Yisrael. I wanted the schus of the Chavetz Chaim by my side. That's why I carry the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, he printed that story. I think that story, that's not the real reason. But Hitler had a cute line, so Rabbi Kotler came back with a cute line. They were friends from Slovakia too. But you know, Rabbi Kotler carried around the Mishnah Berurah because he tried to chop time to learn. That's when he had time for Mishnah Berurah Seder. I think also they say sometimes when he ate by himself, he would learn Mishnah Berurah. Now, I went through these tshuvas. Who are these tshuvas to? It's also a nice way to you sometimes look at a sefer, a Shalos Tshuva sefer. Just, sometimes, the honest truth, people can write tshuvas to themselves. Oh, this question. Oh, this is the answer. Who wrote the question? It doesn't say the name. The author, wrote the question and provided the answer. But when you see who's asking you questions, you go through the list. Rav Chaskell Abramsky, great dayan in London and later in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Lazer Silver, one of the biggest rabbanim in early America, from Cincinnati. Rav Elchanan Wasserman, Rosh Hashiva in Baranovich. Rav Henkin, Posek here in early America. Rav Bick, Hasidish Posek. Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer, his father-in-law. Rav Elyashiv. And there's even more than that. If you look on the top of your sheets, this is the Hakdama to the first volume of Mishnas Reb Aharon. Now, as I said before, this sefer wasn't compiled by Reb Aharon himself. He didn't publish this in his lifetime. He had no time. He was running around, saving the world, building a yeshiva, running Chinuch Atzmo, and so many organizations, so many things. But his son, Rav Shneir, who unfortunately passed away at a relatively young age, from his hospital bed, one of his last wishes was to try to make sure that these notes that his father left be published. And he dictated, he wasn't involved in the publishing himself, it was already post him being nifter, but he dictated what to bring in the Hakdama of the Sefer. And he quoted a passage from the Netziv, where the Netziv explains the concept, the terminology that's used, that Torah is Eish Das. And the Netziv says there's really two parts. There's Eish, there's the learning of Torah, the pilpul of Torah, the interaction, Talmidim and Rebbeim. That's the Eish of Torah. But there's also the Das. There's also the clarification, the psak halacha that emerges when one learns. It's two parts. Eish, all the fire, and Das, the psak halacha. Now, they write, that was the description, Rav Shneir says, of my father. People know him for his shiurim, for his fiery interaction in the yeshiva. But he also had the ability to clarify, to cut to the root of a topic and paskin it, as we'll soon see. That's the description. And in that second paragraph there in the Hakdama, they bring, I went through all these tshuvas. Some of them don't have names. Do you know who some of those tshuvas were from? None other than Reb Chaim Ozer Grudinsky, the leader of Judaism in Europe, head and shoulders to Achiezer. He was the giant in the generation of the Chavetz Chaim. He was the one, the Gadol Hador, running Klal Yisrael. He sent shuvas and shailas to this young Rosh Hashiva in Kletz, Rabbi Kotler, because he saw in him that he was someone who was already great and destined for even greater things. Right? He came to America at the age of 50. But he was paskening these shilas in his 40s and perhaps even in his 30s. That's when some of these psakim were coming. Questions sent to him by Reb Chaim Ozer Grudinsky. So, Reb Chaim Ozer's haskama as a posek, I think, makes you a posek. I would also point out, as a nice sidebar in history, I went through all these shuvas. You'd be surprised at some of the names of the people he corresponded with. Or I would say some people would be surprised. One of the people, there's a tshuva to Rav Herzog. At that point, he was a Rav in Ireland, chief rabbi of Ireland. But he eventually became the first chief rabbi of the state of Israel. That has one of the tshuvas that Rabbi Aharon Kotler was corresponding with. There's another name, Rav Unterman. I remember that name. If you ever learn Kahati Mishnayos, he's quoted quite a bit. Rav Unterman was also a chief rabbi in Israel. At the time Rav Moshe was responding with him, he was the chief rav of Liverpool. And I found another name which I actually passed on to the family. It's the Rosh Hashiva in YU, Yitzchak Elchanan, Moshe Aaron Paleov. His son-in-law was the recently deceased head of the Chav K, Rabbi Center. So he also corresponded with Rabbi Aharon in a tshuva over there. And you really go through it. I heard in by the 1950s, already that was a time, I guess Rav Henkin was getting older. He was the first posek there in America and controlled much then. But Rav Henkin, after Rav Henkin started to get older, the torch was passed. All major shilos, anything doing in America had to go through the psak, the discussion with Rabbi Aharon Kotler. And thus, for sure in the last decade of his life, Rabbi Aharon saw many, many shilos. Even then, there's a story I found in Rav Moshe's biography that Yoshev asked a shaila to Rav Aharon, and Rav Aharon felt, he said, I can't pass on that shaila, we should ask that shaila to Rav Moshe. And Rav Aharon was actually there in Eretz Yisrael by Rav Yoshev's side, and he went and he called Rav Moshe, this is in the 1950s, on a telephone from Eretz Yisrael, which you can imagine how much a phone call like that cost. He was on the phone for like an hour, debating the topic with him, until they got clarity. Rav Aharon would not pass on that shaila, he deferred to Rav Moshe. And obviously, after Rav Aharon was niftar, Rav Moshe, first and foremost, was the posek for America till his passing. Now, really, I think we'll see this soon also, but probably that shift, when America started, with poskim like, of Henkin, who was a huge Talmud Chacham. Henkin actually, interestingly, was a Talmud of Rabbi Aharon Kotler's father-in-law, Mr. Zalman Meltzer. So they knew of each other. Rav Henkin was a Rav. Rav Aharon was the first posek in America that was a Rosh Hashiva. And after him, Rav Moshe was also a Rosh Hashiva, and was referred to as a Rosh Hashiva. And that itself already changed the dynamic in America of the Rabbanim and the Rosh Hashivas. Rav Aharon was such a force, as we'll see soon. He shifted the whole paradigm. And really the whole yeshiva world, which we'll talk about, but the fact that the Piskei Halacha was coming from Rabbi Aharon Kotler, was coming from the head of, even his day, wasn't necessarily the biggest yeshiva. Tells us maybe bigger than that. But it already changed the dynamic of a Rosh Hashiva and a Posek. That's where I want to shift. Once we realize that Rabbi Aharon Kotler was a Posek, and the prominence that he had in his Posek, going through all these tshuvas from Gedolim, ultimate haskama by Reb Chaim Ozer, I'd like to show you some of the psukim that Rabbi Aharon dealt with. And I think when you see the weight of the shilas that he dealt with, you see, I think, the way his son Rav Shneir described him in the introduction to Mishnas Rav Aharon. That the same fire that you saw in the learning in yeshiva was also there with the psak halacha, with the clarity and the strength to stand behind the psak. Probably the first major psak, which I'm not sure time-wise was the first, and really this topic deserves its own share. But there's a famous Kotler that went out in the 1950s against the New York Board of Rabbis.
Yes.
That, in short, was, before that, there in America, there were these boards of rabbis, which still exist, which was comprised of rabbanim. Actually, careful what words I say.
This is being recorded.
I know. But Rav Moshe Feinstein in his tshuvas would not refer to conservative rabbi as a rabbi. He would refer someone, Orthodox Rav was a Rav. Conservative, Rav Moshe would write out the English word rabbi in quotes, trying to emphasize the fact there's a big difference. And Rabbi Aharon was one of the driving forces in this Kol Koreh, which asered, so Kol Koreh is psak din, which asered an Orthodox Rav to serve on a board together with a non-Orthodox rabbi. And it was a big tumult in its days,
Oh yeah.
for not just its days, it lasted for a while. But Rabbi Aharon was the strength and the force behind it. He got other Rosh Hashivas assigned with him. And anyone who knows, you can go through a share on that, which names were on that Kol Koreh, which names weren't. It was, Rabbi Aharon, Rav Moshe, and Rabbi Yaakov, but there were others that were not there. But Rabbi Aharon had the guts, the strength to stand up for his position. I found a story, fascinating story, someone told me. Rabbi Aharon took positions on the Manhattan Erev. I believe this is before the Hak about the Brooklyn Erev. Rabbi Aharon took a position, there are tshuvas here, the Chelak Aleph, and the Mishnas Rabbi Aharon, where Rabbi Aharon writes extensively about Erevin. And I was told that those tshuvas were about the Manhattan Erev. And though it's not clearly defined there in the tshuva, but Rabbi Aharon was against it. And there's a story that I heard ABP that this psak that Rabbi Aharon, they're talking about the Erev there, and later Moshe joined him in that psak, that he also was against it. And this is in the early years of Lakewood. Rabbi Aharon was fundraising for his yeshiva Lakewood. He was also the chief fundraiser for Chinuch Atzma in Eretz Yisrael. And by the way, he also was Rosh Yeshiva of his father-in-law's yeshiva, Eitz Chaim in Eretz Yisrael. So he had at least 3 budgets that he had to worry about. And he was flat out threatened, if he comes out against this Manhattan Erev by certain rich Gevirim, that don't expect to see a penny. And Rabbi Aharon thundered on the table. He said, "I'd rather close down my yeshiva than to budge 1 iota from the Shulchan Aruch." No, you're not going to play me like that. Rabbi Aharon was such a gibor, such strength. Think about, now I told you these stories. One of the famous stories, Rabbi Aharon went in, people here know the players, I forgot the names, but during the Holocaust of Adat Salah, he went in and pleaded with one of the secular American aides to, I don't know if it was the president, and he was pleading to him in Yiddish. And I believe it was the president or one of the senators, who was an American who did not know a word of Yiddish, said, I don't know what the man is saying, but I believe him with all my heart. Where Reb Aharon spoke, his piercing blue eyes, he meant it with every fiber in his being. You're not going to mess with him in Psak Halacha. He's not backing down. Especially not for money. And really, Eruvin, which we all know is one of the most complex topics in Halacha, Reb Aharon was absolute bucky. The Lakewood Eruv was built by his Talmud, that we mentioned before, he was very close to, Rav Moshe Heineman of the Star K. I was told, it's quite fascinating, Rav Moshe Heineman is an ingenious person. He decided, okay, Rav Aharon's going to come check out the Eruv. Rav Aharon entrusted Rav Moshe Heineman to build the Eruv. So Moshe Aharon wanted to get as much shimush and much clarity in halacha from Rav Aharon as possible. So you know what he did? He built the Eruv, and he deliberately built it with multiple shilas of things which are not so pashut if it works or not. Just so when he'll take Rav Aharon around the Eruv to show him all the things, he'll get as much shimush as possible, much clarification as possible, to see what Rav Aharon holds about Eruvin. And that's what he did. In the writing, there's a beautiful sefer, maybe I'm a little biased, my cousin, Shlomi Francis, has a beautiful sefer published by Feldheim, or Israel Bookshops, excuse me, called The Laws of the Eruv. Beautiful English book with diagrams. He told me he spent hours sitting with Rav Heineman, and there's extensive psakim of Rav Aharon, some from the Mishnah of Rav Aharon, and many that were Baal Peh, that he got from Rav Heineman, who got directly from from Rav Aharon, using this cute idea of how to get more shilas from him. There's a quite scary, complex shayla that Rav Aharon had to deal with. It's on your sheets, the second Maramakom. This is from the second volume of Mishnah Rav Aharon. Even HaEzer, Siman Samach Gimel. I'll read the shayla inside. It says, Nishalti, okay, from the Rav of Shuchmin, in the following case. Shnei Achim, there were two brothers. Basically, two brothers. Shahaya Echa Mehem Nasai. One of them was married to a girl. V'Hasheni L'Meshudach Achas Eishes Achiv. And the other one was engaged to his brother's wife's sister. Halachically, that's mutter. It's a concept of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid who's machaner against that. But technically speaking, al pi halacha, two brothers could marry two sisters. So the case was one brother was married, the other one was engaged. Yesterday Daf Yomi in Yuma, not Yavamas. V'nifter hanasoi. V'heiniach ishto muberes kishlosha chadashim. Rachman, I saw the details. It was a car crash. The husband died, leaving a pregnant wife, Rachman al-Flan. But a potential shayla of Yiba. The husband died at this time without children. The Achiv wrote to Lisa Mishadachas. The brother was ready to go through, wanted to marry his fiancée, his kala. Ve'ina wrote to Lahamtin Ashatele. The Yibum Shiloh will only be finished if that pregnant woman gives birth to a child. If Chas v'Shalom she would have a miscarry, she would fall to Yibum. She would be subject to Yibum. So the Shiloh was asked to Reb Aharon, what should we do? And Reb Aharon breaks down, there's 3 points in this very complicated Yibum Chalitza Shiloh. One question is, there's a concept called Achas Zukukaso. One's not allowed to marry the sister of someone that you are connected with towards Yibum. This is a strange, weird situation where a guy intends to be marrying. Guys in yeshiva know we learned these sugyas. You ever know Nogea Halacha L'Maisa? Marrying Achas Zukukaso, the wife of someone you're connected with in terms of Yibum. Right? Let's make it that Ruvain was the brother who passed away. Shimon, if you go through right now, she's only in the 3rd month of pregnancy. Do you want to wait another 6 months? The guy doesn't. He could be marrying Achas Zukukaso, the wife of someone he's zakuk to. That's a big problem. Also, shaylas of the Mavato Mitzvahs Yibum, and what's going to be if Chas v'Shalom she does miscarry. Would you need Chalitza? And if you get Chalitza, would you allow to stay married to his wife? Could be Achas Chulutzaso, the sister of somebody to Chalitza to. Very complicated, not run-of-the-mill shaylas. Who got the shayla? Reb Aharon Kotler. Reb Aharon Kotler has a huge tshuva on this. Reb Aharon Kotler knew Yevamos backwards and forwards, upside down, inside out. He mastered this case for multiple reasons. But this is just a taste of what Reb Aharon Kotler was dealing with. The biggest of the big. When we do Yevamos, if you want, we can go through the whole tshuva. But it might take a month. Huh? He paskin it's mutter. It's mutter to get remarried, and he actually pushed him to get married as quickly as possible. That's what he told him. One of his adherim was, Aharon held in such a scenario, the wife isn't halakhically falling to Yibum yet. Even though it's right there in the horizon, doesn't have a kid, then ein lo ein love, the Gemara in the beginning of Acholitz. But Reb Aharon Paskin, in this scenario, she's not falling to Yibum. The Chiddush, but even bigger than that, bigger shoulders. I'll tell you another very interesting psak halacha, and this will transition into the 3rd and final area I want to talk about Reb Aharon. We all know, maybe it's a little reminiscent of our spread, right? Everyone loves a bris. You get those round things, bagels, donuts, a lot of fun, right? When do you have a bris? In the morning. Why do we have a bris in the morning? Why don't we do it in the afternoon and the evening? So 2 reasons. Firstly, for the average case, there's a difference. You have the concept is you can do a bris in the morning. So Zriza Makdima says you do a bris as early as possible. And that's why the normal time to do a bris is in the morning. The cases you sometimes have a bris in the afternoon or the evening, a lot of times are the medical cases where there was a delay in the bris, and once they get clearance, they set it up as quickly as possible. Especially if the bris is after the 8th day. There's an even greater significance, more than Zriza Makdim. Once a person, now there, obviously, there's an onus involved. But the concept is after the 8th day, every moment is a big inyan, is a chiyuv that you must have a bris. And you can't push that off. It's even more of a chomer, or more of a stringent topic than Zriza Makdim. So that's why we have brisim, always, in the morning or right away as soon as we get medical clearance. Well, back in Rabbi Aharon Kotler's days in Lakewood, brisim took place during lunch. Excuse me. I found this in print, and I checked it up with some people. Rabbi Aharon Kotler's Lakewood brisim, not in today's Lakewood, but today's Lakewood is not Rabbi Aharon Kotler's Lakewood. But Rabbi Aharon, in Rabbi Aharon's days, brisim in the yeshiva took place during lunch. What was the reason? Bidul Torah. You have a bris, sit together, speeches, this and that. They give a short break for breakfast in Lakewood. Rabbi Aharon Kotler was Machadish. Bidul Torah beats out Zriza Makdimim. Seems Rabbi Aharon was even willing to say this even where the bris was pushed off. There was a chiyuv for a bris at every moment. So I saw someone type it up. Okay, but once you have the bris, it's fine. So Mamela, Rabbi Aharon held that yeshiva sedarim take precedence over Bidul Torah. I was talking to someone about this yesterday. He said, "Oh, it's similar to the psak. Sometimes if a guy misses a mincha in yeshiva, what the correct psak halach is." Bidul Torah takes precedence over many, many things, and I think from that psak you see tremendously Rabbi Aharon's powers and strength of Baal Machadish, strength to stand behind a definitely unique psak, but it also transitions into the next step I want to talk about. And this, I think, was Rabbi Aharon's greatest legacy in psak halacha. And it's so much so that we don't even realize it. Rabbi Aharon Kotler really became, for the most part, the Posek of today's yeshiva world. The psakim that Rabbi Aharon Kotler gave in his yeshiva in Lakewood, and the Mela splintered out to many Talmidim who opened their own yeshivas. And even if their yeshivas are not necessarily going exactly, the Sorah of Rabbi Aharon, but in psak halacha there are many things which carry over. I'll give you one example. Rabbi Aharon Kotler held the halacha that one should keep 72 minutes, Rabbeinu Tam's shita, when it comes to do malacha after Shabbos. He held that in terms of shilos about brisim. I'll show you in the bottom of the sheets. He held that for Sfiras Omer. 72 minutes. You want to know what's the time of Vali Laila? 72 minutes. Now, in the Hasidic world, that's quite common. Right? 72 minutes, Rabbeinu Tam Shita is very much so followed in the Hasidic world. But Rabbi Aharon was the one who pushed it in the yeshiva world. And it's interesting, you look at your local Lakewood Kolo. Over here, many times, when do they daven? They daven 50 minutes after Shkia. And that's so, okay, by the time they finish, it'll be 72 minutes. For Sfiras Omer, they daven even later. They daven 55 minutes. So that they'll count Sfira when it's 72 minutes. I grew up, the Rav of my shul, very close to Aharon Zuckerman, was a Talmud Rav Aharon in his last couple of years. I remember the years that there are times the Rav didn't count Sfira for the tzibur. Most shuls, the Rav will get up there and will make the bracha for Sfira. I remember times Rav Zuckerman did not count Sfira. It was under 72 minutes. He would permit it for the shul, but personally, he kept Rav Aharon 72 minutes. And Rav Aharon actually negotiated, again, psak halacha, but also as a leader. He had a major sit-down with the Satmar Rebbe, Rav Yoel Teitelbaum. Back in the day in New York, seems the way things were running was the regular world. Moshe Feinstein didn't do 72. He did less, he did 50. And the way it worked out in the American scene, Okay, so you had people, keeping, if you hold a Rabbeinu Tam, so it's a chumrah for after Shabbos, but technically speaking, it could be the ultimate kula on the beginning of Shabbos. If it's not seis, if it's not nightfall till 72 minutes, so you know what? You can jump in the shower, you could go driving, even after our normal shkia. Don't forget, the Hasidim, it's too early to daven mincha. I'm joking. But, so one could definitely have issues, and it sounds like there were issues, of a funny scene. In America, the Litvish Yidden starting Shabbos, 18 minutes before Shkia, and the Hasidim going, it's not Shabbos yet. Aharon Kotler sat down with the Satmar Rav and convinced him. He says, I'm going to spread the 72 Rabbeinu Tam, but we have to be machmer on the other end. And that's what Aharon pushed here in America, and similarly they have that going in Eretz Yisrael too. And everybody across the board is not makel like Rabbeinu Tam; they're just machmer like Rabbeinu Tam. I'll tell you a very interesting psak. In the Lakewood Yeshiva, this was true for decades. I was not yet able to be mevayer. Is this happening ad hayom hazeh? But I assume it is. They'll serve meat during lunch, and they'll serve milk for dinner in under 6 hours.
Oh boy.
Excuse me? This is from Lakewood Yeshiva. They're serving milk after meat in under 6 hours? Yes. They did this from the times of Aharon, straight. It could be Ada Yom Hazeh. Where does this come from? Aharon Kotler. Just on Shabbos, someone told me they heard straight from one of Aharon's great Talmidim, or Forsheimer. He's one of the big Posek in Lakewood today. He said that Aharon Kotler held 5.5 hours is the minhag of 6 hours. Aharon Kotler held there is no minhag of 6 hours. 6 hours is 5.5. And therefore he felt this is the psak halacha the yeshiva is going with, and there ain't no room for Talmidim to be machmer. 5.5 equals 6. Now, obviously there are others that might differ with such a psak, and they might think their minhag is 6, and they keep 6. And I don't think I'm personally changing my minhag based on this share. But that's what Rabbi Aharon held, and he was ready to take it even against Kanoim. I'll tell you a story. I just double checked this also from Eretz Yisrael before Shabbos. There's a story back in the day. Lakewood always had their Kanoim, their frummies, who always thought they were better. Unfortunately, it sounds like they were even better than the Rosh Yeshiva. There were some Bachrim that were scheduled to eat by Rabbi Aharon's house. They went before Shabbos and spoke to the Rebbitzin, asking her which bakery does she buy her stuff from. You don't trust Rabbi Aharon Kotler? Maybe these Bachrim didn't realize Rabbi Aharon Kotler was a Posek. I'm giving the share 50 years too late. But it also shows some chutzpah. Bachrim always had chutzpah. But Rabbi Aharon knew he had such talmidim. He had such. Someone told me another story, someone was cheppering him about something about davening he was doing. I got it. He saw these guys, he knew about this type of chavra, but he still stuck to his guns. Yeshiva was keeping 5.5 hours. Okay, that's when we're serving dinner. That's what he held. I'll tell you another psak. Now this is a good story. I'm proud. This one might go viral. I might get in trouble for this, but I did my research. In the early 1950s in Lakewood, it was reported to me that Lakewood served Krispy Kreme, Chalav Stam. I don't really mean Krispy Kreme. That was for effect here in Florida. But the Lakewood Yeshiva served non-Chol Yisrael. If I got up today in Lakewood and said this, I'll probably be stoned. In fact, where do I know this from? I heard this b'shem Rav Yosef Tendler. He was a Talmud of Lakewood. Later, for many years, was a menahel of Yeshivas Ner Yisrael, their high school. I believe Artschool has a biography about him. And he gave Eidos. He remembers when he was in Lakewood, they served Chol Stam. I said the story over to some friends of mine who are Lakewood Talmidim. They said, can't be. Impossible. Lo hayev lo nivra. Sheker v'chazov. Can't be. Rabbi Aharon Kotler with Paskin, he would allow Chol Stam in Lakewood. Shh. Mamash avodah zarah. But it's true. Firstly, you have to realize, this is my brother's point, gets credit, that Rav Yosef Tendler was one of the biggest proponents of Chol Yisrael. He's the one who brought Chol Yisrael, pride of the farm, to Baltimore. He has no axe to grind. He's not looking to show, he was also, Rabbi Aharon was also pro-Chol Stam. No, it wasn't available, it wasn't good, whatever the scenario was. Rabbi Aharon felt in the early 1950s, the yeshiva in Lakewood could use Chol Stam. And there were other yeshivas that did the same. That's what Rabbi Aharon did. Furthermore, I checked it, I had Eidos, also from my phone call from Eretz Yisrael. And the person also Paskin also remembered that they had Chol Stam. He remembered breakstones in Lakewood. And yeah, not so crazy. It's interesting. Yosef Tendler's own grandchildren told over the story to their rebbeim in Lakewood. And of course they had the same response. Oh, maybe your grandfather's getting a little old, he's not remembering things as sharp. He went back to the Zayda. The Zayda said, no. He says, it's a shame that people have to change history to fit the narrative today. We know of such stories. But really, what I want to spend the last few minutes here going through is so many of them in Hagim, in yeshivas, so many things, cute things, substantial things, all come from Rabbi Aharon. First, I mentioned in the earlier share this year how my Rebbe of Kanarik, Ron Kanarik Zitzal, spent the Shabbos in Lakewood and noticed how in benching, Rabbi Aharon would try to finish the bracha of Bnei Yerushalayim and answer Amen together with the person leading the benching. Multiple halakhic reasons to do that. So he himself finished with Bnei Yerushalayim, Amen, together with the person leading the benching. I found interesting minhag. I sometimes confuse in shuls. You sometimes see people by lichadodi. What happens? Okay, so the people who are up, not the people who are asleep. The people who are up, obviously everyone gets up for the last stanza, turns to the back. But you sometimes see people get up for yamim small. I was thinking to myself, hey buddy, like you're jumping. Or if you're half asleep, you're like, hey, do we get there yet? But you see people standing up for yamim small. Well, Rabbi Aharon did even more. He stood for the first two and the last two. Really? To be honest, I don't think I ever saw anyone do that. But Azoi state, it's on the bottom of your sheets, middle of your sheets. Mon Rabbi Alan hayaomi l'shnei charazim rishonim shomer v'zacher v'lichras Shabbos, and the last two yom l'smol b'oy v'shalom. It's interesting in Nusach Sfard. I grew up in the Shul Hadav in Nusach Sfard, right? When you have a yontif, so Ashkenazim we skip the whole thing. Mizra Shir Yom HaShabbos, right? It's another reason daven by an Ashkenazi shul.
Yes.
Shabbos and Yom Tov. But Nusach Sfard, they say half a lechadodi. What do? First two stanzas and the last two stanzas. I would suggest that's where Reb Aharon was coming from. There's something significant. I'm not sure exactly what, but when you break down Lechadodi, the first two stanzas, last two stanzas, Reb Aharon held for that he gave that extra chashivas. He stood up for those first two and stood up for the last two. In terms of Simchas Torah, if you go to a shul, you know how Simchas Torah is. Most shuls have a basic same, they have daven shachris, maybe they have some kiddush, hakafos, laning, musaf, regular. You ever daven in the yeshiva in Simchas Torah, you never know what you'll get. I'm not talking about the atmosphere. I'm talking about the Seder of Tefillah. Aharon Kotler in his days in Lakewood brought down here, also on your page, post Dalid. They would daven shachris, then Musaf, no akafas, no kriyas Torah. They would do duchening by Musaf. Then they would make a big kiddush. Then they'll do akafas. Then kriyas Torah. Then mincha. Then eat. If you daven in the shul, you're scratching your head what's going on. If you daven right here in yeshiva, you know exactly what we're talking about. Thank you, Reb Aharon Kotler. It's a different Simchas Torah experience, different schedule. Sounds pretty different. Oh, what's going on here? You're davening musaf before hakafos, laning. What's going on here? As I zok, Reb Aharon Kotler. One can do that to better facilitate the day. Also, different yeshivas have different minhagim for Chanukah. My yeshiva, funny, we were more makbid here. We were the ones more makbid on Betel Torah than Reb Aharon. I mean, yeshiva, Zman Halakha came. One person would light, stop Seder for a minute. They would light Chanukah Neros, sing Haneros Halalu, and then go back to Seder. And you can light, the married people, Kolo, would only light Chanukah Neros after Seder. In Lakewood, the Posek was the otherwise. They stopped in the middle of Seder, everyone went home to light Chanukah Neros. How come here Reb Aharon favored, the Prati HaMitzvah over Betel Torah? Good kasha. There's a lot we could still poke on all this. But I think that was really Reb Aharon's ultimate legacy from Posek Halacha. He was a Gaon. He was someone who was so prominent as a Posek. Chaim Ozer turned to him before the age of 40. He got all these complicated, these Yibam Shilas. He was the strength behind Eruvin Shilas. New York Board of Rabbis. Creative Psakim. But ultimately his legacy in Posek Halacha, and we don't even realize it, is so many of the Psakim that go on in the yeshiva world, in Lakewood yeshivas, all around, really stem from Reb Aharon. I want to just end with one story, which says a lot about the person. I heard the story from Rabbi Yaakov Getzel Rosenblatt, who for many years had a yeshiva, still exists in Queens, Yeshiva Kesser Torah, which is the minion factory of Queens. If Queens could have a minion factory, it's not the levels of Brooklyn, Muncie, and Lakewood. Borough Park, yeah. But Yeshiva Kesser Torah by Rosenblatt told of the story. He learned by Reb Henoch, but also by Reb Aharon. And one time he was walking the hallway of the old Lakewood Yeshiva. Reb Aharon learned part of the time in his study, in his office. And he sees this scene. The door had a big glass door. He sees the scene. Reb Aharon is literally dancing. No one else is in the room. Reb Aharon is dancing. What is going on here? Reb Aharon sees him. It's like, please go to the base medrash. Bring me Reb Chaim Epstein. Reb Chaim Epstein, later the Rosh Yeshiva of Eastern Parkway, Zichron Melech, and he was considered one of the top Talmidim in the yeshiva in his day. Chaim Epstein goes in. Rosenblatt was still watching to see what happens. He sits down and he learns with Chaim Epstein for like 5-10 minutes. Finishes. Chaim Epstein gets up and leaves and goes back to the base medrash. Rosenblatt's like, what's going on here? So he decided to ask. He found out, Rabbi Aharon told him that there's a shver bir hagran chush and mishpat that he had a question on for 25 years. Finally, he was learning, going over it another time, and he figured out an answer what the Gra meant, the Vilna Gaon meant. And he was so excited, he just got up and danced. He wanted to share it and work it out with one of his Talmidim. So that's why he asked for Chaim Epstein from the Beis Medrash. But here is a man, his love of Torah was something that was so palpable. He loved Torah. He fought for Torah. And it's Megalglim Schus Aidei Zakai, and he's one of the biggest reasons why today in America, Baruch Hashem, we have a lot of Torah. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Have a wonderful week, and really thank you, everyone, for coming. It gives me chizuk. I hope it gives you chizuk, and we should all have a wonderful week.
So